I don't think anyone really knows what it feels like to walk into a room full of people who share the same bloodline as your husband yet treat you as if you are nothing but a tolerated intruder. I was 29 when I married Victor, and though I loved him, I can't deny that stepping into his family's world felt like plunging into an ocean where I was never taught how to swim. Their conversations carried coded references to wealth, to connections to histories I wasn't a part of. Their smiles were never warm. They were rehearsed, polished like masks held carefully in place. And behind every word, every look, I always felt Bianca's presence, my husband's sister, who seemed to live and breathe for the purpose of reminding me that I was an outsider. Bianca was everything I wasn't: effortlessly glamorous, dripping with inherited confidence, and raised in the gilded halls of privilege that I had only ever glimpsed in movies. From the moment I stepped into their family mansion for the first time, she scanned me from head to toe like an appraising jeweler, and her smirk told me all I needed to know: I wasn't worthy. I was the scholarship girl who had worked 3 jobs to make it through college, the daughter of a high school teacher and a nurse, the girl who wore off-the-rack dresses instead of couture. And even though Victor always assured me that he loved me for who I was, the truth was impossible to ignore. His family didn't just dislike me, they despised everything I represented. I told myself I could endure it, for love, for him. But what I didn't realize then was that enduring quietly is often mistaken for weakness, and people like Bianca feed on weakness, the way vultures circle decay. Every family dinner was a battle dressed up as civility. Every holiday gathering was a stage where I was cast as the insignificant extra in Bianca's sparkling spotlight. She knew how to humiliate me without ever raising her voice, without ever saying something so cruel that it could be repeated. It was always in the tone, in the timing, in the way her words cut me down, with a sweetness so saccharine others mistook it for kindness. 3 years passed like that. 3 years of her subtle cruelty. 3 years of me swallowing my pride and forcing myself to smile. I thought I could handle it, that if I just ignored her, if I just kept loving Victor, eventually she would grow tired and move on. But I underestimated her. Bianca never tired of reminding me I didn't belong. And one night, at her rehearsal dinner the night before the wedding, that was supposed to merge 2 of the city's most powerful families, she went too far. And that was the night everything changed. I remember walking into that glittering hall, chandeliers spilling golden light onto tables draped in ivory silk, violins playing softly in the corner. I should have felt invisible, but instead I felt exposed like a candle flickering against a hurricane. I searched for my seat, scanning the rows of polished place cards written in swirling calligraphy, but there was no seat waiting for me. Not one. When I asked quietly, Bianca tilted her head, her lips curving in that polished smile, and purred, "Oh, darling. We only reserve seats for important guests." Her words slid across the marble like poison. Laughter rippled from her side of the table, genteel, polite, but unmistakably cruel. "Victor," my husband shrugged. "Don't make a scene, Hannah." That was all he said, as though I were the problem, as though I were embarrassing him by daring to expect a place at the table where his family sat. And in that moment, standing there under the crystal light, something inside me froze. It wasn't just anger, though, there was plenty of that. It was something sharper, cleaner. A cold, precise determination. Because what Bianca didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had been watching, waiting, gathering threads of secrets and cracks in their polished empire. And I knew deep in my bones that the moment was near. The night unfolded like a cruel play with Bianca at its center. She raised her glass, her voice honeyed but sharp, and mocked a man so powerful, so deeply connected, that everyone in the room felt the tremor of her mistake. Her arrogance dripped like champagne onto the marble floor, and while the others gasped or looked away, I saw it for what it was: the first crack in her perfect mask. When the orchestra played and the crowd tried to recover, I stepped onto the terrace. Zoe was there, Damian Lambert's daughter. Unlike the rest of them, she wasn't a predator in pearls. She had worked, struggled, climbed in her father's company despite being his heir, and she leaned close, her whisper sharp as a knife. My father's been looking for an exit from your in-laws' empire. Their merger with the Hartleys built on sand. When it collapses, it's going to bury them. Her words burned into me like fire, but I stayed quiet, nodding, pretending it was nothing. Inside, though, my heart thundered. For years I had endured Bianca's cruelty. For years she had treated me like dirt beneath her heels. But now I had the weapon I needed. 2 months later, the engagement invitations arrived, heavy envelopes, gilded letters, as though wealth itself had been pressed into the paper. Bianca's smug smile graced every photo in the society pages. The union of Bianca Elizabeth Cara and Alexander Preston Hartley III was to be the event of the year, the perfect merging of two dynasties. But I knew the truth. I knew the cracks beneath the glittering facade. At the engagement party, I wore emerald green. Bianca had requested pastel colors, of course, to match her blush gown. She looked at me across the champagne fountain, her lips tight, her eyes narrowed. But I just smiled back, calm, quiet, knowing what she didn't know, her empire was already collapsing. In the shadows of that estate, whispers flew. I overheard Hartley Sr. sweating over financial troubles, panicked calls about liquidating assets. His voice trembled with fear of exposure. And in that moment, I saw it all, the dominoes lined up ready to fall. All it needed was the right timing. Victor tried to shield me from the storm he sensed, but couldn't see. He told me not to worry, that everything was fine, that Bianca would never let the deal fail. But I knew differently. I had seen the sweat, the cracks, the desperation. I had heard Zoe's late-night call, her voice trembling with excitement. Dad's pulling out tomorrow. The Caras are finished. But tomorrow wasn't soon enough. I wanted Bianca's downfall to unfold, not quietly, not behind closed doors, but in front of everyone. So I made a call of my own. I spoke softly, carefully to Damian Lambert. And though I never admitted outright what I wanted, he understood. He always did. And so the night of the rehearsal dinner arrived. The chandeliers glittered, the champagne flowed. Bianca preened at the head table, draped in silver and diamonds. She thought she had already won, that tomorrow she would marry into even more power. She didn't know that as the clock ticked toward 8, her entire life was seconds away from collapsing. I sat at the farthest table where she had placed me, intentionally, out of sight, out of mind. But from that position I had the perfect view. I watched her smile, raise her glass, bask in the glow of a world that would no longer belong to her. And when Nathaniel, her father, stood to give his triumphant speech about a union of two great families, I felt my pulse quicken, because I knew what was about to happen. Phones began buzzing, one after another, a discordant symphony of alerts that spread through the room like wildfire. Faces paled. Hartley Sr. clutched his chest. Investors scrambled, whispering in panicked tones. News flashed across screens. Lambert Enterprises severs all ties with Cara Industries. Cara stock plummets 43%. Bianca's diamond necklace glittered in the light as she clutched it, her lips parting in shock. Her wedding was unraveling, her empire crumbling, her father screaming into his phone like a madman, while the orchestra stumbled into silence. And through it all, I sat calmly, glass in hand, watching the empire that had mocked me for years collapse into dust. And for the first time in 3 years, I wasn't invisible. I was powerful. Bianca's scream still echoes in my mind when I think of that night. She grabbed Victor's arm, her manicured nails digging into his sleeve as though she could stop the avalanche with sheer desperation. "Do something," she cried, her voice breaking, stripped of its usual arrogance. But Victor, my sweet, oblivious husband, could only stare at her, helpless, his world collapsing along with hers. He didn't have the influence. He didn't have the ruthlessness. He didn't even have the awareness to know that everything had been lost before he could lift a hand. Alexander, Bianca's fiancé, was already turned away from her, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice clipped and cold as he barked orders to his financial team. He didn't even look at her. That said more than any words could. When faced with choosing between his bride and his fortune, the choice wasn't even a hesitation. And as I sat there, wineglass in hand, our eyes met across the chaos. Hers were wild, frantic, filled with the dawning horror of someone who had never once considered she could lose. Mine were calm, steady, satisfied. For a split second, she seemed to understand, just a flash of suspicion quickly smothered by her panic. But I saw it. She saw me. By midnight, the restaurant was nearly empty. The Hartleys had left in a cloud of cold disdain, Alexander trailing after his family without a goodbye. Guests had vanished into the night, eager to distance themselves from the Kara's implosion. What was left of us, Victor, Bianca, Nathaniel, and myself, returned to the estate in silence. The house, filled with flowers and decorations for tomorrow's grand wedding, now felt like a mausoleum. Nathaniel locked himself in his study with a bottle of scotch, shouting at invisible enemies until his voice grew hoarse. Bianca disappeared into her suite, the train of her silver rehearsal gown dragging like a funeral shroud. Victor and I lay in bed, though neither of us slept. His breathing was uneven, heavy with dread, while I stared at the ceiling, replaying every detail of the night in my mind. By morning, the inevitable announcement came. The wedding was cancelled. Bianca's empire of tulle and diamonds crumbled into nothing more than return deposits and hushed whispers across the city. I found her sitting on the floor of her room, surrounded by unopened wedding gifts. Her gown hung limply on the closet door. She looked up at me, her face blotchy from tears, her hair tangled, and whispered, "Are you happy now?" The bitterness in her voice was a knife, but I didn't flinch. "Why would I be happy about your wedding being cancelled?" I asked quietly. Her laugh was hollow. "Don't pretend. I saw you last night. You enjoyed every second." She wasn't wrong. I had enjoyed it. Not in the way she thought, not with cruelty or spite, but with the sharp relief of a wound finally cleaned, even if it stung. I left without answering. Some truths didn't need to be spoken. She knew. I knew. That was enough. Downstairs, Victor looked like he hadn't slept at all. His hair was a mess, his eyes bloodshot. He rubbed his temples and said, "Dad's been on the phone with Lambert all night. Nothing's working. He won't negotiate, won't even meet." There was a crash from the study, a shattering of glass, the roar of Nathaniel's rage echoing through the halls. Victor winced. "We're ruined, Hannah," he whispered. His voice trembled, but beneath it there was something new, an awareness that maybe his family's empire had always been built on sand. I touched his arm. "Not ruined. Changed, maybe." He shook his head, his face collapsing under the weight of despair. "You don't understand. The house, the vacation properties, even our personal accounts, they're all tied to company assets. Dad leveraged everything for the Hartley merger. Everything." I didn't admit how much I already knew, how many whispers I'd gathered from Zoe, from overheard conversations, from the tremor in Hartley Sr.'s voice. I only listened silently as Victor's world cracked. In the days that followed, the collapse was everywhere. Newspapers called it Black Friday for the Karas. Television anchors repeated the same phrases: devastating losses, catastrophic fallout, a dynasty brought to its knees. Lawsuits piled in. The board forced Nathaniel to resign. Their penthouse was seized, their jet grounded. Every glittering symbol of their power became a reminder of their downfall. But it was Bianca's social death that fascinated me the most. The friends who had clung to her for invitations suddenly couldn't answer her calls. The society events that once welcomed her with flashing cameras now pretended she didn't exist. Her name vanished from the headlines that had once worshipped her every step. And the silence that followed her was louder than any ridicule could ever be. I should have felt triumphant. I should have felt vindicated. But revenge is a strange, slippery thing. It doesn't feel like victory when it comes. It feels like emptiness, like staring into a mirror and wondering if the reflection is still yours. Still, I played my role. I accompanied Victor to meetings with lawyers, sat beside him as documents were signed to sell off properties, comforted him when he admitted his father might face charges of insider trading. And when he asked me late one night, "You knew this was coming, didn't you?" I didn't answer. I simply held his gaze until he looked away. Zoe called me 10 days later. She invited me to lunch, her voice bubbling with suppressed laughter. When we met, she raised her glass of water and whispered, "To the architect of the most elegant revenge I've ever seen." I shook my head. I had excellent help. From her bag, she pulled out a small velvet pouch. "I thought you might like a trophy." Inside was a strand of perfect South Sea pearls, Bianca's pearls. The ones she had worn at my wedding, the ones she'd used to humiliate me by loudly comparing their worth to my modest necklace. Zoe's smile was wicked. Dad acquired them in the liquidation. He thought you should have them. I laughed softly, though it felt hollow. I accepted the gift, but later alone I stared at the pearls with a heaviness I hadn't expected. They were beautiful, yes. They were a symbol of my victory, yes. But they didn't heal the years of slights. They didn't erase the scars. They were just pearls. Cold, silent, meaningless. Revenge had balanced the scales, but it hadn't given me peace. One evening, while movers packed up the last of the estate's furniture, I wandered into Bianca's empty room. The safe was open, stripped bare, but a few pieces of her jewelry remained items the liquidators had overlooked. I picked them up, a bracelet, earrings, a pendant, and slipped them into my bag. Not for myself, not to wear, but to close the circle. That week, I made an anonymous donation to the same children's charity that had hosted the gala where Bianca had humiliated Damian Lambert. The jewelry would be auctioned to fund cancer research. The irony was sharp and bitterly satisfying. The same jewels she had flaunted as symbols of status would now go towards saving lives she had never cared about. When I dropped the package off, I felt something inside me unclench. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting to Bianca. I was choosing, and in that choice, I found something that looked like closure. But closure is never clean. It lingers. It whispers. It questions you in the quiet hours of the night. That was the beginning of my reckoning. The Cara mansion, once a shrine to wealth and power, became a tomb in the weeks after the collapse. The hallways echoed with silence. Instead of parties, the flowers from the cancelled wedding withered in their vases, and the grand portraits of stern-faced ancestors seemed to glare down with judgment. The world they had built for generations had cracked in one night, and now all that remained was the dust of humiliation. Victor and I moved through those days like ghosts. He carried the weight of his father's disgrace like a stone pressing into his chest, though he tried to mask it with forced calm. I watched him shrink beneath the burden, his hands trembling when he checked his phone, his voice faltering when he reassured me. "We'll get through this." He wanted to believe it, but the shadows beneath his eyes betrayed him. Nathaniel's rage became legend in those weeks. I would hear the shattering of glass at all hours, the echo of his voice cursing Lambert, cursing the board, cursing the invisible enemies who had dared to topple him. Once I passed his study door and saw him hunched over his desk surrounded by empty bottles, his hands clutching his thinning hair as if he could tear out the memory of what he had lost. He had built his life on control, and now he had none. And Bianca was a specter of her former self. The proud, polished woman who had mocked me with every breath was gone, replaced by a pale, hollow shell. She stopped posting on social media, stopped answering calls. Rumor spread that she had been abandoned by her fiancé within hours of the collapse. Alexander hadn't even offered her an explanation. He simply vanished into the arms of his family's crisis management team. For Bianca, who had once commanded every room she entered, the silence of being ignored was worse than any insult. I watched her unravel with a mixture of satisfaction and pity. She wandered the halls in sweatpants, her hair unbrushed, her eyes rimmed with red. And yet, I knew she wasn't crying for love. She was crying for status, for the loss of the pedestal she had spent her life clawing toward. When she looked at me, her eyes burned not with hatred alone, but with recognition. She knew I had enjoyed her fall, even if she couldn't prove my hand in it. Victor, though, surprised me. One evening, after yet another disastrous meeting with lawyers, he turned to me in the car, his voice soft but steady. "Will you stay?" he asked. "With me?" Now that it's all gone, I reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "Do you think I married you for your money?" He laughed, but it was a broken laugh heavy with sorrow. "I wouldn't blame you if you had. It's what everyone else wanted from us." I looked at him, then really looked at him. For the first time, I didn't see Nathaniel's son, Bianca's brother, the heir to a crumbling empire. I saw the man who had once carried my books across campus when we were in college, who had smiled at me in ways that made me feel like I mattered. I hadn't married him for love in the beginning, but somewhere along the years, amidst the cruelty and the chaos, love had taken root quietly, And now, as his world collapsed, I realized it had grown deeper than I'd ever admitted. 2 weeks later, Zoe invited me to lunch. We met at a discreet restaurant far from the financial district, where whispers of ruin couldn't follow us. She greeted me with her usual mischievous smile, though I could see the sharp intelligence behind her eyes. "To the real winner," she said softly, raising her glass of water in a mock toast. I shook my head. It wasn't victory, not really. She leaned forward, her voice dropping. "Oh, but it was. You played the long game, Hannah, and you won." From her bag, she pulled out a small velvet pouch. Inside, I found Bianca's pearls, the same pearls she had worn to my wedding when she mocked me for my modest jewelry. "Dad's company acquired them in the liquidation," Zoe explained, her smile edged with wicked delight. "He thought you'd appreciate them." I held them in my hands, cool and smooth, perfect in their symmetry. They should have felt like triumph. Instead, they felt heavy like a chain. They didn't erase the years of humiliation, didn't heal the sting of every insult. They were just pearls. Symbols of a war I had won but didn't feel victorious in. That night, I placed them in my jewelry box but didn't wear them. I couldn't. They weren't mine to flaunt. They were a reminder, a relic of a battle that had scarred more than just Bianca. The following weekend, I visited the Kara estate one last time. Movers were packing the remnants of a dynasty into cardboard boxes. The mansion smelled of dust and loss. I wandered into the master suite where the safe stood open, nearly empty. A few pieces of jewelry remained, items deemed Nathaniel's personal property. I picked them up, a diamond bracelet, sapphire earrings, and emerald pendant. I didn't keep them. I had no desire for the trophies of their fall. Instead, I carried them to a courier service and made an anonymous donation to the children's cancer charity that had once hosted Bianca's cruel toast. The jewelry would be auctioned to fund the very cause she had used as a backdrop for her vanity. The irony was sharp, almost poetic. For the first time, I felt a lightness, as though some invisible chain had loosened around my chest. Revenge hadn't healed me, but this act, it gave me something revenge never could purpose. Still, the scars lingered. At night, when Victor slept beside me, I would lie awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had become too much like Bianca. Had I crossed the line from justice to cruelty? Had I let her poison seep into my own blood? One morning, months after the collapse, I opened my jewelry box and stared at Bianca's pearls again. I turned them in the light, watching prisms dance across the walls. They weren't a trophy anymore. They were a warning. A reminder of how easily arrogance can destroy, how vengeance can corrode if you let it. I kept them not to wear, not to boast, but to remind myself of the line I could never cross again. As seasons changed, so did our lives. Victor and I left the ruins behind, moving into a modest brownstone in Brooklyn. It wasn't grand. It wasn't dripping with marble or chandeliers. The floors were scuffed, the windows drafty. But it was ours. For the first time in our marriage, we weren't living under the shadow of the Kara Empire. We were building something of our own. Victor took a position teaching at a business school. His salary was a fraction of what he had once earned as an executive, but his eyes lit up when he spoke about shaping young minds, about giving students the tools to build with integrity. Watching him in that role, I realized something: we had lost wealth, but we had gained freedom. And maybe, just maybe, that was worth more than all the money in the world. Nathaniel surprised me too. One afternoon, he arrived at our brownstone alone. Gone was the commanding patriarch in tailored suits. He wore khakis and a simple button-down, his luxury watch replaced with nothing at all. He looked older, smaller, humbled. He sat in our kitchen with a cup of coffee, and after a long silence said, "I owe you an apology." His honesty startled me. "When Victor brought you home," he admitted, his voice low, "I saw you as beneath us. I was wrong. You were the only one who saw us clearly, who saw Bianca clearly." For a moment, guilt pricked at me. I had orchestrated his ruin after all, but when I looked into his weary eyes, I saw a man who had finally been stripped of pretense, who was finally ready to live without lies. Some lessons, I realized, can only be learned through loss. That night, when Victor returned home and I told him about his father's words, he smiled softly. "He's different now," he said. "Maybe this was what it took for him to finally listen." And in that moment, I realized the truth. Revenge had destroyed the empire, but humility might save the people left behind. Winter gave way to spring, and with it came a strange new rhythm in our lives. The chaos of the collapse had settled into something quieter, though not gentler. Everywhere we turned, the ghosts of the Kara Empire lingered. In the newspapers, in the hushed whispers at charity galas, in the silent absence of Bianca's name from social circles where once she had reigned supreme. The world had moved on, but for us the remnants were still raw. Victor thrived in academia, his energy renewed by the simplicity of honest work. I would watch him leave each morning, books under his arm, his stride purposeful in a way I hadn't seen since our early days. He no longer lived in the shadow of his father's empire. He was carving his own place, one lecture at a time, and in that freedom, I saw the man I had fallen in love with, the man who saw me for who I was, not for what I represented. For me, however, the freedom was tempered by unease. I couldn't shake the memory of Bianca's eyes across the chaos of that rehearsal dinner, the flicker of suspicion, the silent recognition that somehow I had played a part in her ruin. She never confronted me directly, but she didn't need to. The silence between us was filled with unspoken accusations, as sharp and heavy as knives. Then one morning, a courier delivered a small package. Inside was a handwritten note on thick stationery, elegant in its simplicity. Hannah. This pen belonged to my father. He built our company from nothing and taught me that true power lies not in wealth but in patience and precision. You remind me of him. Regards, Damon Lambert. I held the vintage fountain pen in my hand, its weight solid, its craftsmanship exquisite. It wasn't just a gift, it was recognition. Damon, who had watched me quietly for years, who had seen through the surface games, was acknowledging me not as Victor's wife, not as Bianca's rival, but as an equal strategist. My heart raced with pride, but beneath it, unease stirred. Would my father, a man who taught ethics to university students until the day he died, have been proud of me, or horrified by the precision with which I had orchestrated another family's downfall? The question lingered in the quiet of my study long after I set the pen back in its case. Zoe called the next day. Her voice was warm but edged with something sharper. "We still on for lunch?" she asked. Of course. At the restaurant, she leaned in close. I heard Bianca's leaving. Switzerland. A cousin offered her a teaching position at a finishing school. I nearly choked on my drink. The irony was cruel. Bianca, who had once sneered at my lack of refinement, who had mocked me for never belonging in their world, would now be teaching manners to wealthy girls half her age. Zoe smirked. Karma has a sense of humor. I wanted to laugh, but the truth settled heavy in me. Bianca had been cruel, yes. She had humiliated me endlessly. But seeing her exiled, stripped of her crown, reduced to lecturing spoiled girls about etiquette, it didn't feel like justice. It felt like watching someone drown in the same cold sea she had once thrown me into. Weeks passed and then months. Our lives grew smaller but also steadier. The brownstone, once echoing with emptiness, began to feel like home. We filled it with mismatched furniture, laughter over cheap takeout, quiet nights on the balcony with cups of tea. I found joy in the ordinary, in the absence of spectacle. But even in peace, the past had a way of finding me. One evening, Victor returned from visiting his father. He told me something, he said, his voice hesitant. Apparently, Lambert wanted out of the partnership years ago. He even mentioned Bianca's treatment of you as a reason. Dad thought it was just a tactic, but now, he thinks Lambert was waiting for the right moment, or maybe the right person. His eyes searched mine, full of questions he didn't want to ask. You didn't just make a call that night, did you? You'd been playing a longer game. I looked away, my pulse racing. Does it matter now? After a long silence, he cupped my face in his hands. No. Except I'm realizing I never truly knew how strong you were. You're terrifying, Hannah, and I love you for it. His words both comforted and unsettled me. Because strength, I was learning, could be a double-edged sword. It could protect you, or it could consume you. 6 months after the collapse, I opened my jewelry box and held Bianca's pearls again. I turned them in the light, the iridescence throwing soft rainbows across the wall. I remembered her smirk at my wedding, her loud comparison between her pearls and my simple necklace. I remembered the sting, the shame. And now holding them, I felt no triumph. Only warning. Revenge had given me power, but it had not healed me. The pearls were not a prize, they were a reminder. A reminder of how cruelty can ripple, how vengeance can reshape you if you're not careful. I placed them back in the box, not to wear, not to sell, but to guard against becoming the very thing I had fought against. Then, in late spring, a new chapter began. Victor and I met with Damon Lambert in his penthouse office. The city stretched below us, glittering like scattered diamonds. He spread documents across his desk, his voice calm but decisive. The landscape has changed. Kara Industries is gone. There's a void, one that values ethics more than expansion. You two could fill it. Victor glanced at me, his brow furrowed. We'd have to start small. Small, I echoed, but meaningful. And so Horizon Partners was born. A modest firm built not on arrogance or exploitation, but on transparency and sustainability. We hired a small team analysts who believed in innovation rather than intimidation. For the first time, I felt like I was building something that couldn't be toppled by a single bad deal or one cruel toast. But even as I built, the past followed. One afternoon, an envelope arrived in the mail. It bore a Swiss postmark with no return address. Inside was a postcard, a photograph of the Starlight Gala where it had all begun. Bianca stood mid-toast, her champagne glass raised, her lips curved in that cruel smile. On the back, in her handwriting, was only my name. Nothing more. Victor found me staring at it in our office. From her, he asked quietly. I nodded. What do you think it means? I traced the edges of the photo with my finger. Recognition. Maybe acceptance. Maybe she finally understands. I framed the postcard and placed it on my desk, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Actions ripple. Every choice creates consequences. Bianca's toast had been the spark that lit the fire. My choice had been the wind that fanned it into an inferno. Together we had destroyed an empire. But what haunted me most wasn't the destruction. It was the silence afterward. Because revenge is loud when it happens, but the aftermath. The aftermath is unbearably quiet. Nearly a year had passed since the Kara Empire collapsed when Zoe invited us to dinner on a rooftop overlooking the city. She arrived radiant, her prematurely gray hair swept elegantly back, wearing a power suit that made her look every bit the leader she had become. Over dessert, she dropped the news casually, as though it weren't monumental. She had been named CEO of Lambert Enterprises. I raised my glass to her, smiling. You've earned it. She shook her head slightly. No, Hannah. We both earned it. Without you, my father would never have seen the timing. Without you, none of this would have been possible. Her words struck something deep in me. Because it was true, I had lit the match. But was that something to be proud of, or something to carry like a weight? Later that evening, Zoe leaned closer, her tone softer. One thing she said, what you did was justified, necessary even, but be careful. Of what I asked, of becoming what you hated. The warning sat with me long after we said goodbye. It followed me home into the quiet of our brownstone, into the soft glow of the lamp as Victor worked late into the night on lesson plans. I found myself opening my jewelry box again, staring at Bianca's pearls. I held them in the light until rainbows shimmered across the walls. Not as trophies, not as prizes, but as reminders. Reminders of cruelty, of vengeance, of the line I never wanted to cross again. Summer brought new beginnings. Zoe announced her engagement not to a financier, not to a politician, but to a literature professor she had met at a fundraiser. For once, love was simply love, not a transaction disguised in lace and champagne. I attended her wedding in June, held in the sculpture garden of the Met. It was intimate, understated, beautiful. As Zoe walked down the aisle on her father's arm, I thought of Bianca halfway across the world, teaching young women the manners she herself had never mastered. The symmetry was sharp. At the reception, Damon approached me, his steps slower now, age visible in the lines of his face. He lifted his glass slightly. Times are changing, he murmured. Thanks in no small part to you. I wanted to smile, to accept his praise. But instead, I thought of the postcard Bianca had sent me, the image of her frozen mid-toast champagne raised just before her world collapsed. I thought of how one careless act of cruelty had set everything into motion, and how I had chosen to push the first domino knowing exactly where it would lead. Later that evening, Zoe found me standing near the fountain watching Victor laugh with her new husband over some obscure debate about poetry. She slipped her arm through mine. "Remember when we met?" she asked, smiling. "At that Christmas party where Bianca spilled wine on your white dress?" I laughed softly. "How could I forget? You looked at me that night," she said, with the same look you had at the gala. "Like you saw through everything. Through all of us." She paused, squeezing my arm gently. "And you did. Look where it got us." I followed her gaze, Victor smiling, Damon beaming with pride. Real friends, genuine connections, not masks, not transactions. For the first time, I felt the truth settle over me like a cloak. We had all been reborn from the ashes. Different, stronger, wiser. "Karma doesn't forget addresses," I whispered, repeating something my father used to say. Zoe smiled knowingly. "Neither do friends." As the orchestra began to play, Victor appeared at my side, extending his hand. I stepped into his arms, and together we moved across the floor, not as heirs to wealth or survivors of scandal, but as two people who had weathered storms and emerged into the sunlight. The music carried us, and for the first time in years, I felt free. In the months that followed, Horizon Partners grew quietly, steadily. We weren't chasing empires or headlines. We were building something rooted in transparency and trust. Every client we took, every investment we made, felt like a stone laid in a foundation that could not be shaken by arrogance or greed. Meanwhile, Nathaniel reinvented himself. He started a small consultancy, working out of a guest house, advising small businesses that once would have never merited his attention. He was different now, humbled, quieter, listening more than speaking. It wasn't redemption, not fully, but it was something. And Bianca, her postcards arrived from time to time. A picture of the Alps, of the quiet Swiss countryside, of classrooms filled with elegant young women in tailored uniforms. No notes, no explanations, just her handwriting on the envelope spelling my name. It was as though she were saying, "I know you're watching. I know you remember. I remember too." I never replied. There was nothing to say. Our war was over. One afternoon, nearly 2 years after it all began, I walked through our office at Horizon Partners. The framed postcard of Bianca's toast hung on my wall, the pearls still tucked away in my jewelry box at home. As I ran my fingers across the edge of the frame, I thought of everything I had lost, everything I had gained. Revenge had given me power, but forgiveness, though not for Bianca, not yet, was what gave me peace. I forgave myself for enduring humiliation for so long. I forgave myself for taking satisfaction in her downfall. I forgave the girl I once was, the one who thought she would never belong. Because I belonged here. In this life I had built with Victor, in this work we had built together, in this quiet triumph that needed no applause. And if I've learned anything, it's this: cruelty leaves scars, but so does vengeance. The only way forward is to choose which scars you're willing to live with. I chose mine. And though they ache sometimes in the silence, they remind me of the strength it took to survive. So, to those of you listening to my story, if you've ever been humiliated, dismissed, treated like you don't belong, remember this: your silence is not weakness, your endurance is not invisibility. And when the time comes, your strength will reveal itself, not in cruelty, but in clarity. You will know when to stand, when to walk away, and when to let karma take its course. If this story touched you, if you saw a piece of yourself in my journey, I hope you'll take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Most of all, leave me a comment. I want to hear your voice, your strength, your scars, because none of us are as alone as we think. Thank you for listening to my truth.